Essential question 2 is, what were the different varieties of abolitionism? Abolitionism was a movement to abolish slavery, obviously, and the Second Great Awakening played an important role in making many Americans aware of the moral issues posed by slavery. One abolitionist group was called the American Colonization Society, and they advocated for abolition of slavery and relocation of freed slaves to Africa, because this variety of abolitionism assumed that African Americans were incapable of integrating into white society and thus should be removed from it after slavery was abolished. Most African Americans were, of course, opposed to this idea, having not really come from Africa. They were born in the United States, although some did move to Liberia with the society's help. And Liberia's capital is actually Monrovia, which is named after President James Monroe. On the other hand, another variety of abolitionism emerging in the 1830s was militant abolitionism, which called for the immediate emancipation of slaves rather than gradual emancipation of slaves, as some states had already taken to doing. Militant abolitionism used explosive, confrontational language against slave owners and the system of slavery itself, often invoking the language of the Bible, the Declaration of Independence, etc. One example of this militant abolitionism was David Walker's An Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World, published in 1829. Walker was African American himself, and he called on African Americans to mobilize for abolitionism by force if necessary, which was, of course, rather controversial, certainly in southern states who tended to censor this material. Another example is William Lloyd Garrison's newspaper, The Liberator, which was an abolitionist newspaper that used inflammatory rhetoric to call for immediate emancipation. A great way to sum up Garrison's views and militant abolitionism in general is a pretty notable and famous quote from the first issue of The Liberator that's made its appearance on the APUSH test in the past. Anytime you see the end of this, and I will be heard, you know they're talking about Garrison, you know they're talking about militant abolitionism, you know they're talking about antebellum reform. But here in the first issue of The Liberator, Garrison says, "I will be as harsh as truth and uncompromising as justice. I am in earnest. I will not equivocate, I will not excuse, I will not retreat a single inch, and I will be heard." Militant abolitionists like Garrison tended to use printing technology to spread their message through newspapers, pamphlets, etc., which we know was made easier through the invention of things like the telegraph, the steam-powered printing press, and so on that we've talked about before as literacy was growing in the early 1800s.